Hello everyone and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The townsfolk had whispered about Blackwood Hollow for generations, a place veiled in shadows and the unsettling hum of the unseen. Nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, it held the decay of 100 years, each creaking floorboard of its abandoned houses echoing with the ghosts of stories unsung. Long after the last inhabitants had vanished, an aura of dread lingered, like a thick mist that pressed against the skin, suffocating and cold. It was here, not by chance but by a restless spirit, that Clara found herself one rainy evening after driving for hours, desperate to escape the suffocating rhythm of her suburban life. With a tattered map and fading memories of her childhood, she ventured into the hollow, torn between nostalgia and a perverse curiosity sparked by tales of the strange happenings in this forsaken place. As she turned off the main road, the hum of her car's engine gave way to the eerie silence broken only by the sound of raindrops tapping against the windshield, a melancholic symphony that hinted at what lay ahead. The skeletal trees twisted overhead, their branches grabbing at the sky like bony fingers yearning for release, casting ominous shadows that danced in the dim light. Clara's heart raced as she pulled up to a hulking structure, the town's old general store. Now an echoing shell half consumed by nature, vines crawled up the walls like fingers clutching at a long-lost memory, and the front door creaked ominously as she stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something far more acrid, a hint of decay lurking beneath. Each footfall stirred the dust, releasing motes that floated in the guestless gloom, while Clara felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, judging her intrusion. The flashlight beam flickered, revealing faded advertisements and dusty shelves overflowing. With relics of a forgotten time, she ran her fingers over a broken picture frame, feeling the rough edges of glass shards that mirrored the fractured memories of this place. It was as if the walls whispered hints, secrets caught in the web of the past, and for a moment she thought she heard her name, a soft echo that sent a shiver racing down her spine. But she rationalized it was merely the howl of wind through broken glass, a misinterpretation of the environment that felt all too alive. With each passing minute, Clara's unease transformed into a simmering dread, the realization of her solitude amplifying the whispers in her mind. Outside, the rain intensified, battering against the roof like the frantic heartbeat of the hollow seeking to escape its destiny. She moved deeper into the store, navigating through the remnants of lives once intertwined with laughter and sorrow, pausing only when she spotted an old diary, its leather cover cracked and weathered. The pages, stained by moisture and time, revealed the last words of a woman named Margaret, who had chronicled bizarre phenomena, the inexplicable disappearances, flickering lights, and a lurking darkness that promised both terror and release. As night fell and the storm raged outside, Clara felt the atmosphere shift, suffocating her with a palpable dread. The air was colder now, each breath laced with the metallic taste of fear and something else, something ancient. A noise echoed from the back of the store, sharp against the underlying harmony of rain. It called to her, a subtle invitation laced with malice. Struggling against her instincts, she pushed herself forward, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cool concrete wall, a silent promise coaxing her to uncover the truth. What? Lay behind the door at the back was not a stockroom but a staircase spiraling down into darkness, drenched in an oppressive silence. A chill wrapped around her as she descended, the air growing cloying and thick, whispers of previous trespassers swirling around her like a surreal tapestry woven from dread. With each step the darkness deepened, wrapping its cold fingers around her heart, squeezing as the flicker of her flashlight revealed remnants of a different kind. Old photographs pinned to the walls, hideous faces peering out from the decay, their mouths twisted into lingering screams. Panic clawed at her throat as shadows danced in the periphery of her vision, flitting among the photographs, their haunting presence echoing the fear swarming in her mind. Each image felt alive, as if the souls of those captured had been binding themselves to the hollow, stitching their fate into the fabric of its dark history. A sudden noise, like a child's laughter, twisted through a mouth that never learned to smile, sent her heart skittering. She turned, the light beam trembling, revealing fleeting glimpses of movement, urging her to flee while there was still time. But curiosity, that insatiable beast, drove her deeper into the abyss. She stumbled upon a small room, walls covered in age-old newspaper clippings that chronicled harrowing tales of madness and despair. The headlines splashed across the yellowed paper seemed to roil with tragic intensity. Vanishing children, the hollow wails, shadows at midnight. Clara's breath caught. She could feel the weight of countless souls pressing in, blackened tendrils of despair wrapping around her as she began to understand that the hollow fed on fear, feeding in a cycle of dread that had consumed the town. In that moment of realization, the whispers grew louder, transforming into desperate cries woven with grief and rage, as if the hollow itself was alive and hungry. Images from the clippings became real. The faces twisted in horror began to fill the room, their vacant eyes poised with pleading that struck Clara with a flurry of emotions, her own torment reflected in their agony. She could almost hear their thoughts intertwining with hers, the realization of a shared fate sealing her in a web of despair she could not unravel. Clara's instincts screamed for her to escape, yet the darkness wrapped around her like a heavy cloak, insisting she remain as the very walls pulsed with anticipation. She was drawn back to the staircase, retreating into the silence above only to find the familiar gloom had shifted. The way back seemed altered, shadows deepening, hallways expanding and contracting like the hollow itself was breathing. A flicker of hope ignited within her, but it faltered just as quickly when the realization struck. She was no longer merely an intruder. She had become part of the hollow. The sound of her heart thudded in her ears, mingling with the whispers, the unseen siege tightening around her, a relentless wave of panic. She stumbled through the store, desperate to escape but trapped within a labyrinth that mocked her. As her mind raced with visions of ghosts and despair, realization struck. It wasn't the hollow that was haunted, but her, a life consumed by her own fears and regrets drawn into this inescapable darkness. And then, silence fell, oppressive and absolute, cloaking Blackwood Hollow in a suffocating embrace that defied reality. What she had believed to be shadows were now figures standing silently at the edge of her vision, embodiments of her failures, her struggles, all bleeding into the fabric of existence. Clara's mind shattered under the weight of revelation, a kaleidoscope of memories and horrors no longer hers alone, but the hollow's consumption etched into her very soul. Time lost meaning, stretching infinitely as the absurdity of it all settled like dust upon her heart. In the end, the whispers ceased, replaced by an unsettling stillness that hid the depth of countless lost souls grappling for release. Clara understood that she was not escaping. She was entwined, her essence drawn into the churning darkness itself. She would become one of them, a new chapter in the hollow story, Her face would join the ranks of twisted memories pinned upon the walls, trapped in a loop of torment forevermore. As the rain melted away the past above, Blackwood Hollow thrummed with life yet untouched, eagerly awaiting its next curious traveler. The air was thick with a damp chill as Elena stepped off the train, her breath forming little clouds in the evening gloom. Dalgate, a forgotten town wedged between jagged cliffs and an unforgiving sea, seemed to lean away from her, as if the very earth wished to expel her presence. A pale moon hung low in the sky, spilling ghostly light onto the cracked pavement, illuminating disused storefronts with peeling paint and shattered windows, each a quaint yet hollow echo of a life that thrived there long ago. Elena hadn't planned to come here, but the news of her estranged grandmother's passing had pulled her back like a string tethered to a forgotten past. She could barely recall the woman's face, but a gnawing feeling in her stomach hinted at unresolved ties, a legacy that perhaps wasn't as distant as she'd imagined. The first gust of wind whispered through the narrow alleys, too soft to be a warning yet unsettling, threading through her hair like skeletal fingers. As she navigated the deserted streets, a sense of being watched prickled at the back of her neck. Shadows danced just beyond her peripheral vision, darting into corners before she could turn. It wasn't just the emptiness of Dalgate that unsettled her. It was something alive, something deeply buried beneath the cobblestones and rotted wood, waiting for her arrival. The flickering street lamps seemed to pulse rhythmically, echoing her own quickening heartbeat, as if feeding off her fear. Searching for her grandmother's home, Elena stumbled upon a dilapidated library, its grand wooden doors ajar. Intrigued, she stepped inside, where dust motes floated in beams of pale light, revealing lines of books stacked carelessly upon one another. The scent of mildew wrapped around her, thickening the air and curling into her lungs, suffocating yet familiar. One book, its spine cracked and pages yellowed, drew her in. It was a collection of folk tales riddled with bizarre folklore that spoke of the town's haunting past, of a pact made with the sea, shadows coiling like serpents around lost souls. As she flipped through the pages, she learned of a curse that shrouded Dalgate, binding the town's inhabitants to a fate marked by regret and despair. Sensing a chill creeping up her spine, she looked up, finding the once welcoming warmth of the library had turned cold, and the shadows in the corners seemed to twist into grotesque figures, watchful and hungry. The librarian, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes, stood silently at the doorway, a specter of an era long eclipsed. A shudder coursed through Elena. It felt as though the very walls pressed closer, echoing the despair she had read about. That night, the old house her grandmother lived in welcomed her with its creaking floors and faded memories. A once celebrated garden, now a tangle of thorns and weeds clawed at the broken fence surrounding the property. Inside, the musty scent of decay lingered in the air, mingling with the aroma of something sweet, like rotting fruit. The shadows danced as she moved from room to room, revealing glimpses of old portraits where her grandmother stared out with eyes that seemed to follow. These haunting gazes bore the weight of sorrow, one that felt both personal and collective. As the hours dragged on, Elena found herself unable to sleep, plagued by an oppressive sense of dread. The walls creaked and moaned as if the house were alive, as it whispered secrets long kept in silence. Every now and then she heard whispers drifting through the hallways, indecipherable yet urgent, as though the very air carried untold stories. Shadows flitted in the corners of her vision, and the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, pressing down upon her like a shifting weight, a warning of impending doom. Morning light, if it could be called that, seeped through the grimy windows, tinted a sickly yellow, further tainting the atmosphere. Each creak of the floorboards beneath her seemed louder, more rhythmic, like the town itself stirring in protest. Driven by a need for answers, Elena returned to the library, the tales now an insatiable itch beneath her skin. There she found the librarian again, waiting with an unsettling smile that stretched too widely across her face. Her fingers reached toward the shelves, beckoning Elena towards a hidden alcove shrouded in darkness. In the alcove, she discovered a diary belonging to her grandmother, its pages filled with frantic handwriting and drawings. A map, perhaps, of her thoughts, leading to an unnamed cove marked ominously as sacrifice. The last entry thrummed with desperation, claiming that the town had to reclaim what was lost, to appease the sea that craved souls. The realization crashed over her like a wave. Her return wasn't accidental. She was part of a cycle generations, deep a pawn in a game orchestrated by shadowy forces that thrived on their despair. A sudden chill swept through her, the light dimming as though the sun itself were swallowed whole. The librarian's figure had transformed. She no longer looked human, but rather a grotesque amalgamation of despair, with features that twisted into something not quite alive. Panic surged within Elena, and she turned, running from the library, her heartbeat drumming loudly in her ears. The town was a maze, twisting and turning, shadows trailing behind her like tendrils reaching to grasp her ankles. She fled to the cove, the sky darkening with foreboding clouds above her. The air was thick with salt and something acrid, mixing with the scent of decay wafting from the water. Reflected in the waves were visions of the townsfolk, trapped in an eternal cycle, their faces twisted in anguish. As Elena stood at the edge of the abyss, a voice echoed from the depths, drawing her closer. Not a voice of warmth, but one of promise and pain, coaxing her to join them, to fulfill the pact sealed in blood, to reclaim her place within the specter-laden folds of Dullgate. Overwhelmed with dread and despair, Elena felt the weight of generations pressing down upon her. With one final glance back at her ancestral home, she stumbled forward, a single step that felt like a descent into madness. As the waves crashed, she became part of the tapestry, a new shadow among many, to wander, to wait, to whisper warnings of a descendant who came to claim what was never truly hers. And as the tide receded, the town remained, an eternal watchtower, keeping secrets for those foolish enough to return. In the heart of a forgotten town, shrouded by thick, gnarled trees that clawed the sky, stood the remnants of a once magnificent library. Its facade was crumbling, the dark wood rotting under layers of mildew, while the air was heavily scented with damp earth and dust. Rumors swirled among the town's dwindling residents of the unspeakable secrets the library housed, tales whispered through cracked lips and fearful shivers. It was here that Juniper Thorne, a solitary archivist with a fascination for the macabre, had come seeking shelter from life's relentless storm. This dilapidated edifice was supposed to offer her a sanctuary. Now it felt more like the belly of a beast. As she crossed the threshold, the door creaked with a mournful wail, the sound echoing down aisles lined with suffocating shadows. Within, the shelves stood like tombstones, binding the weight of the past in leather-bound tomes and dusty manuscripts. An oppressive silence enveloped her, wrapping around Juniper like a favorite if moth-eaten blanket. The dim light struggled to penetrate the eternal twilight of the space, and something whispered in the back of her mind, hinting at the stories, trapped within their bindings, stories that had long ago been forgotten. Juniper had come to catalog and preserve, but curious excitement prickled her skin as she wandered deeper into the stacks. The air grew colder, a sudden chill that seemed to slither around her ankles. She nudged a book free, its cover blank, before flipping it open. Blank pages filled her gaze, an abyss of nothingness that made her heart race. Emboldened, she rifled through others. And though the books appeared innocuous, she sensed something lurking just out of sight, a pulse of energy that hummed beneath the surface. Each time she turned a page, the weight of expectation beside her became heavier, more invasive, until she could almost feel a breath at her ear. The library held no photographs, no sign of life, yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. As the hours slipped by, the shadows lengthened malevolently, stretching into grotesque forms that danced just beyond her periphery. Night crept into the room, a velvet darkness thick with the smells of earth and decay. The distant echo of her footsteps melded into the library's suffocating silence, forging an unsettling companionship. Juniper's heart quickened. Was it fear or intrigue she felt? As she navigated deeper, she sensed the presence of others lingering in the shadows, invisible sentinels bound to this vault of forgotten lore. A rustle broke her trance, sending her into a wild scramble of nerves, only to discover a small flickering candle perched atop a desk left untouched for decades. It flickered not from a breeze as the air remained still, but as if beckoning her closer. Why was there light in this house of darkness? Driven by an insatiable curiosity, Juniper approached with slow steps, each crunch of broken wood beneath her feet amplifying her dread. She reached for the candle, the flame illuminating twisted mockeries of her own fears reflected in the mirrors of her memory, glimpses of abandonment and isolation that had terrorized her since childhood. Suddenly, the candle fizzled, and the library fell into a suffocating blackness so profound it swallowed her. She fumbled in the dark, near panic edging her instincts. In her desperation, she turned her mind to escape, but the library's layout blurred in the shadows. Rooms and corridors twisted into impossible angles, impossibly endless. This place through which she had ventured only hours before was transforming into a labyrinth of despair. The familiar scent of dust and old paper became mingled with something far worse, a rancid odor that clawed at her throat, making her stomach churn. The realization sank in. This wasn't just a library, it was a graveyard, and she was intricately entwined in its twisted narrative. Just as whispers began to take shape around her, ragged breaths laced with malice, she stumbled back into a small alcove lined with more tomes, each title a sickening invitation to delve into the darker sides of humanity. With trembling hands, she drew a volume towards her, the leather binding pulsating beneath her fingertips, a heartbeat of its own, pretending to slumber. The words within morphed as she read, revealing atrocities committed in this very place. Tales of necromancy and madness that echoed through time, each story leading to a deeper abyss, a darker truth. Had the library begun to consume her, linguistically and physically twisting her mind into a tapestry of horror? Panic forged through her as shadows coalesced, creeping closer, drifting hands of ink attempting to pull her into the story she read. The air was thickening with anxiety, and Juniper was no longer certain where she ended and the library began. The whispers became clearer, voices rising in a crescendo of dread, urging her to listen, to understand the price of knowledge in a world that had long since forsaken logic. Her skin prickled as she noticed ink dripping from the pages she held, pooling onto the floor like fresh blood, and she realized this was no mere library. It was a conduit between realms, a prison for the souls whose stories had been told. In the deepening silence, she suddenly felt drawn to the far wall, where a bookcase seemed to waver, almost breathing. It collapsed under her touch, revealing a hidden chamber swathed in velvet darkness. A figure crouched within, its features blurred and indistinct, but longing emanated from it. It reached out, beckoning her forward with ethereal promise. The chance to escape the clutches of this abyss. In that moment, she saw herself reflected in its eyes. Lost, hollow, a silhouette swallowed by shadows, and felt an unbearable pact form between them. She could leave this place, but in return, she would bind herself to the stories forever, becoming one with the whispers of madness. The library trembled as if to respond, a chorus of voices rising in protest or perhaps in ecstasy. The choice loomed before her, a harrowing decision that summoned her deepest fears to the forefront. Did she dare sacrifice her humanity to this eldritch hunger that thrived on the sorrow of souls? As Juniper took a step forward, ready to embrace a fate, entwined with the countless tales intertwined within the library, a nail-splitting crack echoed through the room. The air vibrated with an unspeakable dread, cascading her into darkness as the walls warped and twisted, reality unraveling around her. In an instant, just as her fingers brushed against the being, lands twisted into an otherworldly vista. Vision, splintering into facets of horror, bodies trapped and contorted within pages, shadows taking form, books alive with eyes. The grip of the library grew voracious as the essence of Juniper began to fray, the ink devouring her flesh, the stories absorbing her very essence. Terror surged, mingled with warped euphoria, the library claiming her as the ultimate story. One, bound by loneliness and horror. It would not be long before the townsfolk heard whispers of their missing archivist, tales of her voice echoing through the library, just beyond reach, forever infusing the darkened halls with her essence. The library, once a mere structure of brick and mortar, now thrived as a being, hunger ever growing, waiting for the next curious soul to unravel its secrets. But Juniper was lost, trapped within a constellation of narratives that would extend far beyond her comprehension, forever feeding the grotesque cycle of terror birthed within those decaying walls, a memory now written in blood. The old mansion on Rookwell Hill had stood abandoned for decades, its walls cloaked in a perpetual mist that seemed to cling like death itself. Whispers of the past lingered in the air, tales of a family lost to madness, leaving nothing but shadows in their wake. With every thud of the wooden doors, a cold shiver echoed through the once grand hall, where dust motes danced like lost souls in the fading light. Candace, a historian with a relentless thirst for stories of the macabre, embarked on a quest to illuminate the secrets of this ominous abode, unaware that in her search for knowledge, she would unearth something far more sinister. Driving beneath a lead gray sky, Candace felt an unsettling pull toward the mansion. She had discovered the place while researching cases of historical hauntings for her upcoming novel, but the stark reality of its dark allure ensnared her. As she set her foot on the gravel path leading to the gnarled entrance, the air grew thick, like syrup, heavy with the musk of earth and decay. Her heart raced, an instinctive response to the looming presence that seemed to watch from the windows, which were devoid of light yet felt disturbingly alive. The front door creaked ominously, before yielding to her touch, releasing a breath of stale air as if the mansion had been holding its breath for years. Inside, darkness enveloped her like a shroud, the once cherished furnishings now draped in cobwebs and neglect. A surprise flickered within her as she peered at the grand staircase spiraling into the dark above, despite the gnawing sense that every creak and sigh around her was a warning to turn back. But curiosity propelled her deeper, a moth drawn to a flickering flame, unaware of the dangers ahead. Her fingers brushed against the peeling wallpaper, revealing faded symbols, their meanings lost to time. The pungent smell of mildew mingled with something far fouler, a sweet rot that lingered in the back of her throat, evoking a sickening feeling in the pit of her stomach. It was then she heard the whispers, soft yet insistent, a cacophony of voices that seemed to echo her name, pulling her toward an unseen force that twisted within the walls. She pressed her palms against her ears, willing the sounds away, but they persisted, saturating the air around her. When Candace entered what had once been the family's parlor, sunlight erupted, breaking through the grime and glass. Images of a grand past flickered in her mind, dinner parties, laughter, yet all that remained was an eerie silence. A large, cracked mirror hung on the wall, drawing her in. The reflection revealed her own anxious face, but behind her stood a figure whose face was obscured in shadow. A fleeting glimpse that sent ice coursing through her veins. She turned, only to see the room empty, her pulse thrumming in defiance of the stillness. Determined to unravel the threads of history haunting her, she thumbed through fraying papers scattered across the floor. They spoke of rituals and despair, years, steeped in tragedy, lost time discarded like the remnants of their lives. A name echoed through her thoughts, one that reverberated through the house. Eliza, the youngest daughter whose fate had intertwined with darkness itself. Haunted by her curiosity, Candace traced Eliza's story through the fragments of time, her mind weaving a narrative that grew more chilling with every step she took deeper into the mansion's heart. As twilight descended outside, shadows elongated and twisted into grotesque shapes, warping her surroundings. The once familiar atmosphere morphed into a labyrinth of dread, painted in the hues of despair and fear. The whispers coalesced into soft cries, tugging at her sanity. She stumbled into the kitchen, where the remnants of meals long abandoned lay petrified. However, a feeling slithered over her that something else dwelt within these desolate walls. It began with fleeting glimpses, a shadow darting out of the corner of her eye, a chill brushing against her neck, as if the house was alive, its very essence feeding on her confusion. Each room she traversed felt like a trap, ensnaring her in a web of despair and despair. Time shifted, and her thoughts spiraled away from reason, melding with the echoes of those who had come before her, mingling their regrets into her own. Alone with her panic, Candace's fear transformed into paranoia as she realized the voices weren't just haunting her, they were guiding her. She rushed back to the parlor, heart racing against the escalating thrum of the unseen presence behind her, clinging to her shadow. The mirror now pulsed with a grotesque vitality, reflecting not just her but what lay beneath her skin, a chaos of twisted memories and lost souls yearning to break free. In a moment of reflection, the realization struck her. She wasn't just uncovering history. She was becoming part of it, an unwitting vessel for its remnants. Desperate to escape, Candace turned, but the rooms felt unfamiliar, shifting and closing in. Each doorway led her deeper into darkness, where the house itself laughed with malicious glee. She stumbled into a nursery, where faded toys seemed to whisper secrets of innocence shattered. A child's laughter echoed, taunting her with innocence that clawed at her heart, yet the sound morphed into something sinister, enveloping her in a sinister embrace. Suddenly the walls began to pulsate, breathing heavily as if the house were alive, and Candace's mind teetered on the brink of oblivion. She was trapped in a nightmare woven from the fabric of time and despair. The voices coalesced into a singular presence, a sinister melody that beckoned her to join the ranks of the forgotten. Panic clawed at her throat, but it pressed on, dragging her deeper into the abyss of history, ensnared by the stories she had once sought after. In that moment, she understood the true horror of the mansion. It craved not just to be remembered, but to claim its piece of the living. Ostensibly futile, she fought against the currents pulling her into their dark thrall, clawing back fragments of her identity. But the harder she fought, the more it took. The faces in the mirror morphed into a twisted gallery of all those who had succumbed, their tormented faces screaming a warning too late to heed. As the final strands of her will shattered, she felt the cold fingers of the past envelop her, entwining her memories with those who had been lost. The mansion exhaled, a satisfied sigh, rolling through its decrepit walls as Candace faded into the tapestry of its haunting, her screams merging with the whispers that once beckoned her in. In what remained of her consciousness, she realized that the tale of Rookwell Hill had found an unbreakable thread in her story, forever stitching her fate into the sinister legacy of the house and its forgotten souls. The next day, her car was found parked at the foot of Rookwell Hill, empty and silent. No sign of Candace, save for the journal she had filled with frantic scrawls, ink bleeding on pages that smelled of desperation. In the months that followed, the town would whisper of the apparition seen in the windows of the mansion, a desperate figure wandering the halls, searching for a way to reclaim the life that had been devoured by shadows. The legend of Eliza grew, entwined now with Candace's own, a haunting reminder that some stories must remain buried, for those who breathe life into them may find that the price is their very soul.